we have a panel discussion for you. And to host this and to take you through it, delighted to welcome on stage Varsha Sethuraman, who's Senior Research Associate at Lux Research. Varsha.
Thank you so much, Leo. I know it's almost end of the day, and so I hope you really enjoyed your coffee break, because I'd love your attention for the next 30 minutes for this really nice panel that we have here today, which, please, I'd like to welcome our 4 panelists. Just a quick introduction, and then I'll pass it on to them to also briefly introduce what they do. So we have Mark Simmers from Celtic Renewables, Hendrik Waegeman from Biobase Europe Pilot Plant, Geoff Nobes from RWDC, and Amin Delparish from Process Design Center. Please give them a big round of applause for joining me today. And I'll let our panelists introduce themselves as well. Mark, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. And delighted to be here at the conference. Hope you're all having a good and positive day. Celtic Renewables is a Scottish-based biotechnology growth company. We have a proprietary process that turns biological leftovers and waste from primary industries, the whiskey industry in Scotland, agriculture, and we convert that through a fermentation process into acetone, butanol, and ethanol. The 2 primary products being acetone and butanol, which we are selling into pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and a whole range of other use cases.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Hendrik, why don't you introduce?
Good afternoon to all of you. So I'm Hendrik Waegeman from Biobase Europe Pilot Plant. Biobase Europe Pilot Plant is one of the largest or the largest pilot and demo facility for industrial biotechnology. So we help companies to bring their innovations from lab to fab. So from lab over pilot to demo to first series compound production. And we do that in different verticals. So food, chemicals, materials, cosmetics, and also critical raw materials and rare metals, for example. So basically everything where you can use industrial biotechnology instead of fossil-based processes. And happy to talk a little bit more about the aspect of scale-up today in this session.
Awesome. Yeah. How about yourself, Geoff?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to this session. Thank you for the invitation to participate. I'm Geoff Nobes, Director of Business Development for RWDC Industries. We are a manufacturer of PHA biopolymers based in the United States and in Asia. And you've all been able to already experience our materials at lunchtime today using the forks and knives and spoons that one of our customers generously provided for this conference. So looking forward to the discussion with the panel here.
Great. Amin.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm from PDC, Process Design Center, based in Netherlands. So we are a group of process engineers founded 40 years ago, and we have been quite involved with the startups and the scale-ups in biomanufacturing space, at least in the last decade. So PDC, you could say, has evolved over time with how the market has evolved and what was actually needed in the space of process engineering and R&D in that space. So I'm happy to be here. Yeah.
That's really nice. So we have a diverse group on stage today, and thank you all for that really nice introduction. I think to set the stage, there's a big structural question that we've seen being discussed today throughout the event so far. And I think the question is, Europe, we're really fantastic with pilot infrastructure and really good research capabilities, but when it comes to commercializing the technologies, most companies choose to go to different geographies. So my question, I think, I'd like to pose it to Mark, is what is the single most important requirement for a biomanufacturing platform to attract investment in Europe, but also in the UK today?
Yeah, that's the sort of $64,000 question, or probably a lot more than that. So at Celtic Renewables, we've built our first-of-a-kind commercial plant in Scotland. So we've kind of got over that very difficult sort of hurdle of achieving that. And, you know, it's the singular hardest thing I've ever done in my life is raising the capital and going through the process to do that. I think the main bit that for us was finding the right patient investors who were willing to go on the journey with us to get through the very difficult stage of designing, developing, constructing, and then bringing into operation that plant. And inevitably, that's taken a lot longer and cost a lot more to do than we ever envisaged. And I guess the single most important thing was getting alignment with those investors, but really getting them to believe in the long-term vision of what we were seeking to achieve in terms of the scale of the market opportunity, the potential from a downstream product perspective, and ultimately the team that we could pull together to deliver on what we said we would do. So I think that's, it's incredibly difficult. We're part of iBioIC, who've got a stand here, Scottish-based industrial academic partnership. And there was a whole host of different companies coming through iBioIC, and very few of them have made it to where we've got to, because it is just incredibly difficult, both in the UK and I think right across Europe.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. And I think, Geoff, because you have a facility in Indonesia, but also in the US, which is a future plan, how does that look like also to build a first-of-a-kind facility? Because scaling PHAs is also not an easy thing, right? So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that's right. Certainly, our technology was all developed in-house. So we really started from the bench scale all the way up to full production capacity. In our case, what we chose to do, and Mark kind of alluded to this in his comments, right? In terms of the cost and the time and the stress level, if you will, is we built what we call a demonstration plant, where we could actually demonstrate at scale. So the process and the technology to give investors that confidence, where about 70% of the equipment in that demonstration plant is the exact same piece of equipment that will be used in a full-scale production facility. Fermenters, obviously, different scale. They're about 10 times smaller than full scale, but all of the downstream equipment, all of the purification equipment, all of that, extruders, what have you, all at that scale, exact same piece of equipment, in order to show people that, yes, we can do this. We can do it reliably. We can do it repeatedly and consistently with high quality.
Yeah, no, exactly. And Hendrik, very interestingly, you sit in the intersection of this, where Biobase Europe pilot plant helps scale up and has a really nice infrastructure in Belgium. Anything to add to what Mark and Geoff just said?
I think it's very impressive what they both achieved. Let's begin with that, because, okay, the ideal scenario is you go from lab over pilot, you do maybe some demo with a service provider like ours, you build your own demonstration plant, and then you go full scale. But to get that all financed is extremely difficult. So we've seen many other companies struggling with that, to build that demo plant just to get all the funds together. So congratulations on that. I think in Europe, because that's the difference maybe a little bit with the UK, is that of course we have some European instruments that can help to fund those phases. So luckily we have instruments like CBEGU that can finance partly a first-of-a-kind facility. But even though those instruments exist, it's still very difficult to get to that larger scale, and especially to the full scale. I think what I would like to add there as well is, like, on demo scale, the aspect of price parity and economy of scale. You're basically also a bit in a catch-22 situation, because on the one hand, you need very large-scale production to get good economy on your process. But to justify such an investment and those large-scale production, you need offtake. But your off-takers will say, yeah, but sorry, you don't have any track record in production, so you're basically locked in a bit in a situation that's very difficult to get out. So I think if we're not able to really solve that issue, it will remain very difficult to get to a full-scale plant.
Can I just comment? Of course, yeah.
Yeah, and I think just for full disclosure, and when the UK was still part of Europe, we actually did all our pilot testing at Biobase Europe. It's a fantastic facility. But just to show the complication of our pilot work, we were using byproducts from the whiskey industry, which we were shipping from Scotland to Ghent in Belgium. We were doing the fermentation process with yourselves very successfully, with some of our team coming over there. We were then shipping what came out of that fermentation to Switzerland, to Sulzer, to do distillation trials. And then we were shipping the material back to the UK, back to Scotland, to basically validate the results. So it was a pan-European sort of pilot study that was not exactly straightforward. And that's why we ended up having to build our own demonstration plant. If you come to our stand in the main hall, you'll see the scale of what we built in Scotland. But you know, what these guys do is fantastic, and we wouldn't be where we are today without the support of Bio-based Europe. So it is a fantastic facility.
And just to plug in, if you haven't watched the Jurassic Park parody video of Bio-based Europe pilot plant, I would highly recommend watching it. It's very interesting. So I think I'd like to shift gears a little bit. We've spoken about money, we've spoken about first-of-a-kind facility. I also want to talk about what actually happens when you're building something from pilot all the way to demo or commercial facility. Amin, tapping on your expertise with Process Design Center, if you look at a lot of technologies at pilot scale, they're able to achieve their KPIs, but moving beyond pilot scale, that's where they come across a lot of issues, especially when it comes to process, design, modeling, and things like that. What is that inaccuracy from moving to pilot to demo or commercial scale that startups should kind of anticipate or foresee?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I don't call it as an inaccuracy, but basically overlooking few parameters. So the main issue is that extrapolating from an ideal pilot scale to a commercial scale, that's the first mistake to be making. So at PDC, what the approach that we usually take and the philosophy that we have is that even if the concept is still coming out of the lab or on a pilot scale, we always try to give it an industrial outlook to see what could actually be the bottleneck of the process, right? So we don't only look into the core of the chemistry to pilot that, but everything around that to get the product to the specs that is actually needed to go on the market. So then that's how we make sure that we are piloting and addressing the knowledge gap early on, so that the factor of surprise becomes less and less when you go on. But even if you do that perfectly, you should always take into account that there is always uncertainty that is going to be associated with this, because when you go down the line of your development, risks do materialize. So you have to always be ready for that margin of assumptions that did not actually work out the way that you wanted them to work. So that's what I'm saying right now is basically within the boundary of the process or the plant that you want to do. Another thing that is overlooked is everything outside that boundary. So imagine how the utility that you need is generated, how the distribution is going on, how you are going to connect to the grid, wastewater treatment, and like all of that. So if you are going to use renewables, then you're hoping for a cost of renewable to be probably lower at the time that you are doing your commercial, but we are seeing that in many studies it's not materializing, and then at the end that's going to kill the process. So these are the things that are outside the battery of the process, but are still very important to consider. So that's the concept that we have at PDC to take an iterative approach from pilot to lab, and also then to a demonstration, back to pilots. And then this back and forth would help you to basically close the knowledge gaps and reduce the number of surprises that you might actually see with your commercial.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned utilities. It's such an important factor that we don't anticipate, especially with things becoming so expensive, energy costs rising and things like that. How about yourself, Hendrik? Anything to add from experience at the Bio-based Europe pilot plant?
Well, I think I'm very much aligned with what just has been said. It basically also boils down a little bit to keeping the end in mind and making sure to capture as much as you can already in the early design or in your TEA.
Of course.
I think when we work with companies and when you see them making mistakes, I think the most often made mistake is that they're too optimistic on their numbers. Because any manufacturing plant, of course, you will not get the full output from the start. It will take years of operation to learn continuous improvement to really get to something. So it's especially that optimism more targeted to the DSP, the downstream processing, where the recoveries typically that they anticipate are too optimistic than what in reality they would get. You want to comment on that, or?
Yeah, regarding the DSP, is that there is one unfair disadvantage to biomanufactured products, is that they have to fit to an already established value chain that is dominated by petrochemicals. So then we have to actually adapt to a playground that is dominated by another player, and we have to find a way to get into that. So it might never work in that way. So that's again outside the boundary of the processes, and it might actually get into the policies and decision makers. But we have to actually define a value chain that is welcoming to biomanufacturing biomanufactured products, rather than these products being like trying whatever they can to fit something that they cannot fit. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, in a way, bio-based industry is somewhat trying to reinvent the wheel, but also compete with a very well-established market, but also policy that more or less supports the fossil-based industry, right? It's evolving, but it's still quite slow at the rate that we want it to change. Right, so we understood where the model works and where the gap is. I want to understand a little bit more about the process. We spoke about DSP, but before the DSP, Mark and Geoff, we have other things to take into account: strain performance, fermentation control, and things like that. Which part of that process upstream really becomes a bottleneck? Why don't you start?
Where do I start? I think, as with any biological process, there's the number of key areas. I think probably the three key ones for us are, the whole upfront feedstock preparation. How do you get to a consistent recipe of what you're putting in and really understand the consistency of that on a year-round basis? Because you tend to do pilot trials, at intermittent times of the year. When you actually start getting that material on a constant basis, the variability there can be difficult to deal with. So I think that's one key challenge. I think the number one challenge for us was, and our biggest enemy was contamination. And unfortunately, we got the design wrong in terms of the sterility level of our plant. So we had a sort of 2-year fight really to sort that out, which certainly tested the patience of our investors and put us through a number of near-death experiences, frankly, while we were trying to sort of fight our way through that. And then I think, as Amin said, I think, there's then the kind of optimistic operational model that you pull together, and it's all the unknown unknowns that you really don't anticipate coming at you. And it's just having the sort of perseverance and resilience to work through those. But yeah, the feedstock up front, and then just really getting the fermentation to work and dealing with contamination issues were the big things for us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And how is it for the PHA side of things?
Yeah, so I think we have, I would say, a somewhat similar experience in that I would say contamination is probably the biggest thing that, we learned early on to make sure that we spent the time and the resources and honestly sourcing the right equipment to build that correct process in order to avoid contamination, right? And there's that goes down to equipment itself. It goes down to the design of the process in terms of how you're moving things through the process, and that probably bigger than anything else, I would say, is really the thing that can really trip you up and spend a lot of time and issues with that. The second thing I think I would say in our case was just we learned a lot going in the scale of fermentation, right? Going from the bench scale to 150 liter type of fermentation to 1,500 liter to 3,000 to 60,000 liters and then beyond. Learning that optimal process for managing the microbes as you go into those scales is really a key learning, I would say, as well.
I think the last thing I would say also is you need to have a bit of a mindset shift as well, when we're undertaking a challenge like this. And actually, the way we look at, maybe sounds sort of slightly negative about the sort of process we've gone through to get our plant operational. But actually, when you look back and say, actually, if we hadn't gone through those challenges and fixed all those problems and understood where the challenges were, we couldn't now be designing a 20x full-scale industrial plant with all that knowledge behind us. So, if you look at, from our perspective, we look at the demonstration plant as being, it's completely delivered on what we needed it to deliver on. The process works, it operates consistently, and we've learned some very, very hard lessons in terms of understanding how to do this at full industrial scale. And I think we didn't go into it in the right mindset from that perspective, but in retrospect, looking back, you kind of go, okay, yeah, right. That's a tick in the box, actually, frankly.
I'll just add one additional thing there, if I may, Varsha. Like us, our demonstration plan did what it was supposed to do, right? It got us to where we needed it to be. One additional challenge that we've encountered is now taking that, which was very much a research facility, and turning that into a production facility. So, that is kind of also our initial production, where we're just running, standard production type of mode, both in terms of equipment, design, and operation of that facility, but also the personnel as well, which is also, I think, maybe, we talk a lot about the process, we talk a lot about, DSP, what have you. It's also the personnel there, too, is converting that personnel mindset, if you will, the training, from really a research facility into a 24/7 production facility.
Go ahead.
Just wanted to add, we never have contamination at bio-based power plant. No, that's a joke. Of course, we also do have contamination, but there's an important difference. I think, first of all, I think we also optimize our way of working. We do preventive maintenance, of course, to try to minimize the risk of contamination. But importantly is, like, indeed, you work with special feedstocks that can have additional issues that can lead to contamination, and then it's important to do this thorough root cause analysis. What is the difference, of course, between a pilot and demo facility and a full demonstration plant is that when we have to fix something, it's manageable. It doesn't cost a fortune to fix it. You've seen in a lot of cases in demonstration plants that indeed the consequences of a non-sterile design or issues with sterility can have serious consequences financially. So it's also one of the reasons why we started, since now 2 years, providing engineering services. So the people who work with us do scale up. Back in the days, we couldn't offer it to Celtic because we didn't do that yet. But we help companies also when, and can be in combination with another engineering firm, to be clear, to really focus on the aseptic design so that you don't make mistakes there, because they can be very, very tough and painful mistakes.
Yeah. So for me, all of that basically boils down to process robustness. You need to have a robust process that can take in a range of variabilities. One of them, feedstock, was mentioned, right? So if you're piloting, probably you have to make sure that you are testing range of feedstock that you can test, and make sure that your process can accommodate for that. Because if you don't do that, it leads to unknown number of hours that you can actually probably run per year, and then the feasibility of the process will be under the question, right? Because if you have more and more downtime because the process couldn't handle one specific impurity or one specific, sand in your feedstock or whatever, that simple stuff can basically also kill a business as well. Yeah.
I agree, but I think also when you're working with pilot but testing different feedstocks, moving to demo, pre-demo, pre-commercial, like sticking to one particular feedstock that works for you is important to overcome some of these bottlenecks that we just discussed right now. Awesome. That was a very nice discussion, and we are unfortunately coming to the end of it. And And so I'd like to finish off with something forward-looking, because since morning we've been talking about funding gaps, regulatory friction, even there was, I think, a mention of value of death. So maybe something optimistic for the room to take away. So in a single sentence, what's that one thing that, looking 5 years ahead, what needs to change to make biomanufacturing more scalable, more investor-friendly, and more repeatable across Europe, but also other geographies? Why don't you?
In one sentence. There is a lot of capital out there, but it needs more patience. And so that is critical. But I also think that the kind of regulatory framework and the collaboration framework for, this sector needs some more thinking, so that we all work together as bio-based industry to move forward, understanding that we're displacing and replacing what currently comes from petrochem. And so we're not competing with each other, we're ultimately the future for mankind. And so that's my positive outlook.
Yeah, I love that. Not competing against each other, but working with each other. And I think the industry needs more of that. How about yourself, Hendrik?
Yeah, I like to talk about technical scale, but I'm afraid regulatory and permitting is probably the main bottleneck these days. I mean, if you look at novel foods, 4 to 6 years, biopesticides, even up to 12 years. I mean, you talked about Jurassic Park, you referred to it. Well, when a technology takes 12 years to be accepted, then it's a dinosaur, and it's not really the best technology anymore. So I think that's the main friction or the main bottleneck that we currently have. And if we're not able to solve that and make it also more predictable, that investors know, okay, we need patient capital, but this is what it's going to take. Let's do it. Now it's also very, very unpredictable. They all hope for 4 or 5 years and end up at 10 to 12 years. So.
Exactly. How about yourself, Geoff?
So I agree with the comments, around the regulatory. I would add, from my perspective, the optimistic side of things is really, I would see the tide changing in terms of pull-through from customers. There's a huge amount of interest. I've been in this space for many, many years in one way or another. The conversations we have today compared to the conversations we had 20 or 25 years ago are completely different when it comes to customers. And I think that really shows that, we're just on the cusp of doing this great thing. We're at the forefront of that, but there's a lot of customer interest and a lot of customer pull, and there's a lot of people who get it, is kind of the short answer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, anything from a process design or anything else?
Yeah, so if I want to say one thing optimistic, is that the fact that we are here and having these conversations and the amount of R&D that we are putting into this space is the optimistic part of it. But what needs to change in the coming 5 years, or probably I don't know how many years, is that we have to just accept that biomanufacturing is going through a learning curve, and the whole value chain should understand that. Investors should understand that. Consumers should understand that. Governments should understand that and accommodate for that learning curve to actually have its own time to take and then wait for the results to come in. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for this really nice discussion. And thank you all for paying attention and being here.